Everyone, we have an upcoming fight at UFC 314. The return of Nikita Krylov since I don't know how long ago. I think his last fight was 2022, 2023, something like that. He beat Ryan Spann by submission. Very impressive win. And since then, we just had not seen anything from him. Still in the UFC, still in the rankings, still signed, all of that. Just quite a big layoff. But now he's returning against a recently resurging Dominick Reyes on a 2-fight win streak. Not against the best competition, but considering the loss streak that Dominick Reyes was on, it's very good to see him back in the winning ways with a win over recently against Anthony Smith. So this is a very interesting matchup as you have Dominick Reyes, who's been coming off quite a big layoff, versus a recent form of Dominick Reyes. And I wanted to take this video and talk about how underrated I think Nikita Krylov is. As when you just look at Nikita Krylov's UFC record, which I believe is 11-7, that doesn't sound like a lot, but considering this guy is only just now turned 33 and has almost had 40 fights, I believe this is about to be his 40th fight. Yeah, he's 30-9 right now in MMA. This guy's had a lot of fights, has been active, has been in the UFC since he was a very young fighter. So a lot of time for experience to grow, and now he's finally showing it more and more. Currently on a 3-fight win streak against Gustafsson, against Ozdemir, and against Ryan Spann. And I think that's very good. And then considering also some of his losses against who they're against, such as win streak Glover Teixeira, the same Glover who managed to become the champion later on. And this was also a split decision loss, I believe, against Teixeira. So honestly, he performed better than Jan. He also fought Jan. He did lose that fight, but that was also, I believe, his return to the UFC after, I don't remember why. He might have been cut, but also I don't think so. I think he just left the UFC and came back after a 4-fight win streak. Lost to Jan by decision, I believe. Jan, UFC champion. And then he also lost a 29-28 decision to current UFC light heavyweight champion Magomed Ankalaev. A very competitive fight, mind you. I do obviously think Ankalaev won that fight, but for him to take a round off and make it incredibly competitive for all 3 of those rounds is no easy feat. I think the only weak loss you can say on his record as recent form is Paul Craig, which, surprise submission from Paul Craig, upset. That's kind of the big example people use when they pick Paul Craig to win fights, is like, oh, well, he can finish the fight at any time because he did it to Nikita Krylov. And I'm one of those people who think 9 out of 10 times Krylov beats Paul Craig. It was just that one time. If they rematch now, Nikita Krylov finishes him first or second round, in my opinion. But after that loss, he ended up KOing Alexander Gustafsson. Now, a very well-known name, title contender, multiple-time title challenger, on a very steep decline for Alexander Gustafsson. So, not the most impressive win, but still a win. And then he beats Volkan Ozdemir, which, on the other hand, especially at the time, is a very impressive win, as Ozdemir, I believe, was coming off a win against Paul Craig, if I remember correctly. So, you do MMA math. I think I might have picked Ozdemir to win simply just because he beat Paul Craig, I think by decision. So, he went 3 rounds without getting finished and won that fight clearly, whereas Nikita Krylov got finished. So my brain was going to pick Ozdemir, which that didn't end up. But very fun fight, very good, like a little scrap back and forth. Technical at a lot of points. Nikita Krylov clearly wins that fight, has a win over a top 10 contender. And then he beats Ryan Spann, and I believe Ryan Spann was coming off a win against Dominick Reyes at the time. If I remember correctly, I believe so. I think it was after Ryan Spann KO'd when he KO'd Dominick Reyes. He then fought Nikita Krylov, got submitted pretty quickly in the first round. And this is one of the big fights I want to use as an example, because even though Ryan Spann is not an amazing fighter, at the time I think he was in the top 10. He's not a very smart fighter and does a lot of dumb decisions that I feel like if he was just a bit smarter, had better fight IQ, he could be he could still be in the top 10. I won't say top 5 just because I don't think he's as impressive in terms of physicality and strength as people were hyping up after he KO'd Dominick Reyes, but he would still be in the top 10 for sure if he was just slightly smarter. But here's the thing. Nikita Krylov was moving not like how light heavyweight does in the grappling department. Very technical, very like jiu-jitsu focused, but without needing to fall on your back and fucking pull guard. Freaking was technical, precise, and got him out of there in the first round. So I think he's a very technical dude. He has a competitive fight with Ankalaev, and honestly, I think he has like another competitive fight against Ankalaev if they rematch. I won't necessarily say he'd win, but he would be a pretty interesting pick, in my opinion. That would be a very interesting matchup. Now, do I think he's going to beat Dominick Reyes? Yes. I think as much as I like Dominick Reyes and I believe he beat John Jones, his 4 losses he had, his 4-fight losing streak, does still mean something in terms of his chin. And the 2 guys he's beaten, while impressive and good for me to see, and I'm all happy for that, he didn't really get his chin tested. Anthony Smith is not going to test your chin by any means, and he flash KO'd his last opponent. So I think Nikita Krylov, who's a lot more durable than all the other 2, has more power than the other 2, in my opinion, has more submission threat than the other 2. I think he's going to beat Dominick Reyes in the second round. And then from there, I don't necessarily know who he fights. I'd have to think about in the light heavyweight division, because Carlos Ulberg is most likely going to fight Jan. Alex Pereira might immediately rematch. I think he is going to immediately rematch Ankalaev, which I'm fine with in this case. A rematch with Jan could be interesting just because, Jan does have a win over him, and even though Jan did just lose to Carlos Ulberg, I thought that was a robbery decision. I thought that Jan had won that fight pretty clearly, in my opinion. I might have to rewatch it, but I do think he won that fight. And even if he did lose that fight, it was still competitive enough that I don't think Jan is completely washed, despite being, I think, 40 now, which is crazy. So you could do that rematch. You could do, if you really wanted to go crazy, you could have him refight Paul Craig and just have him beat Paul Craig just so you can say, like, hey, I beat him. Trying to think who else he could beat. Because I'm trying to think about what win will get him closer to a title shot. I'm trying to think because now I'm blanking on light heavyweights. And I don't know who has a fight, who doesn't have a fight. But I think a Jan rematch would honestly be the most interesting just because Jan is still a competitive matchup, still an amazing striker. He made that Carlos Ulberg fight incredibly competitive, arguable win, but either way, it's a competitive fight. So I think that's the next matchup to make if he beats Dominick Reyes. If Dominick Reyes beats him, honestly, give him the Jan fight as well because he also has a loss against Jan Blachowicz. But other than that, that's my thoughts on that fight. On Nikita Krylov, I think he's quite underrated. Let me know what you think in the comments, and bye.